Hi, my name is Kevin Lanave. I'm the director of the Center for Service Learning and Social Change, a local nonprofit that works with youth and adults on social justice issues. Jim McAllister has worked with us on several video projects to tell the story of the impact of our work. I've really appreciated the creativity and sensitivity of the pieces that Jim has created with us. I've also been grateful for Jim's willingness to be, as he says, the paintbrush, which allows us to be the painter. And I have really enjoyed the spirit in which Jim interacts with people, with those whom he's filming, and with me as we walk through a project together. Jim McAllister has not only made our work more visible to the community, he's strengthened it. And for that, we're deeply grateful. Thanks, Jim.
One of the stories that I like to offer to people after we've been involved in doing service work for a while is to ask them to imagine having a picnic alongside a river above a waterfall that's maybe 100 feet, 200 feet downstream. And if you're from St. Cloud, I suppose you could picture being across from St. Cloud State, the Munsinger Park there, and the fact that 10th Street Dam is just down the road a ways, okay? So picture yourself having a picnic, enjoying each other's company, and all of a sudden one of you hears a scream, and you look out in the river, and there's this 5-year-old kid floating helplessly down the river, struggling in the water towards that waterfall, towards that 10th Street Dam, and you're like, oh my goodness, one of you dives in, and you get out to the child, and you know how kids are. Anybody is struggling in the water. They put their arms around your neck and you submerge, and everybody else panics and runs to the edge of the river and does a human chain thing and gets wood and anything they can get out there to reach the child and you. And finally, you reach the end of that human chain and you bring the child ashore, and the panic becomes relief and you're celebrating the rescue. And the parents come a few minutes later and thank you for what you did. And somebody driving nearby, driving over the 10th Street Bridge, saw it happen, called on their cell phone to the local paper. And the paper sent a reporter and a photographer, and they're taking your picture. You're going to be on the front page of the paper tomorrow. That's a really cool thing. And you go back to the picnic, and you're having a good time and playing and visiting and all of that. About a half hour later, there's a scream, and you look out into the river, and there's this 7-year-old child floating helplessly down in the water towards the waterfall, towards the 10th Street Dam. And somebody else, because you're tired, dives in and swims out to the child. And sure enough, just like with you, they grab around the neck, and they submerge, and everybody panics and runs, does the human chain thing, and eventually you get them to shore, and you're relieved. Parents come and thank you for what you did, and you know what? The reporter and the photographer hadn't left yet, so your picture is going to be, the rescue is going to be pictured on the front page of the paper. And the celebration resumes. Except about an hour later, there's a scream, and you look out into the river, and there's a 9-year-old child floating helplessly down towards the waterfall, towards the 10th Street Dam, and one of you dives in. But by this point in time, some of you are going wait a minute here. What would your question be if this was going on? Wouldn't you wonder, where are these kids coming from? And that question occurs to a couple of you who run upstream, and what you find alongside the river about a half mile up is a daycare on the side of a hill. And because there's no fence between that hill and the river, the kids go out and play in the yard, and every once in a while one of them trips and falls and rolls down into the river. I remember telling this story at one point with a group of high school students, and a kid looks at me and goes did this really happen? I'm like, of course not. On one level, it's a pretty absurd story. But on another level, it happens all the time. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, I ask you to imagine, for example, what we do in this culture around Thanksgiving time to help those who are hungry and homeless. Food drives, for example, right? So we'll donate all of this food, and we'll bring it in, and believe me, it's not just about the food, it's also that sense of caring that comes with it, and people appreciate it. There's nothing wrong with it. But I'd ask you to imagine, what are people eating, say, mid-December? Obviously, they're not eating that food anymore. I was telling this story and giving that example to a group of students in the high school I used to teach who were doing a food drive, and I told them the story, and I said, what are they going to eat on December the 10th? And they looked at me, and one of them said, should we do a food drive for Christmas? I said, well, that'd be a really good thing, and it wouldn't just be the food, it'd be the sense of caring and compassion that goes along with doing it. But what are they going to eat on January the 10th? And they were looking at me and thinking. I thought, boy, I wonder what's going on. I'll bet you they're getting this. I'll bet you they're thinking about this story and the message in the story. But when I walked down the hallway the next day, and these were seniors in high school, one of them came up to me and said, I figured out your story. I thought, good. She says, we have a program that does kind of peer helping that meets every other week. We could do a food drive in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I just kind of hung my head and I thought, there's nothing wrong with doing food drives. They're good gestures. But if you don't ask, why is this happening? Why are people poor? Why are people homeless? You're kind of trapped in the same situation as we would be sitting along that river looking out going like, hey, look, another kid, it's your turn. I mean, that would be absurd to just do those things. There's nothing wrong with looking out constantly in the river to see who's coming, but to never ask, why are people poor? Why are people homeless? That wouldn't make sense, and yet we don't do it, or we don't do it nearly enough. In my community, when we ask the question, why are people poor, why are people homeless, the answers are things like low-wage jobs, the high cost of housing and health care and child care, the cuts in government programs that help with those kind of expenses. Those are some of the main reasons why people in my community are poor. And so if we're concerned about what they're going to eat, it can't just be giving them food at Thanksgiving. We also have to deal with issues like living wage jobs and affordable housing and health care and child care and increased funding for those kind of government programs. And if we don't do that, that's as strange and absurd as sitting alongside the river, looking out and going like, hey, look, another kid, it's your turn.